next slide. This is, yeah, so I'll start here. Let's talk about just in general, what we're trying to accomplish is really to increase, obviously, your knowledge, but also your confidence. There's a great team here, and you will, if there's one thing you leave with, you retain absolutely nothing. The main thing is that these folks are here to help you, and it's an impressive group who really either have already done this many, many times, or they're just, they are the experts in these particular areas. They hand the baton to each other as you go through this process. So it really is, it's a very sincere offer. We want you to leave with a set of next steps so that you know perhaps what you could be doing until you really take this on and get yourself some more information. And then at the end, as well as in between, we're going to have time for questions. And just an extra shout out to Sean to thank him for this collaboration for you guys today. So it's been really great to work with him. So here's the cohort. My email is here. It's just amy@olbdc. And we'll talk a little bit about this at the very end. So just an idea often helps folks who are, especially out in the rural areas, to work together. All right, we will introduce who needs no introduction. Jim Rokaka is just going to say a few words, given that he's had so much experience in Ohio around the land banks. And get us started, Jim.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me, folks? Okay, good. First of all, I'm thrilled to be on this panel, and it's hard to believe that it was 16 years ago this summer when I was Cuyahoga County Treasurer that we got together with a group of advocates in Cleveland who were battling the foreclosure crisis, and we had to come up with some idea to help us get control of vacant and abandoned properties. And it's 15 years ago last month that we started the first land bank in Cuyahoga County. And boy, how the movement has grown, huh? We started with one. We have 69 county land banks today. Well over $1 billion has been raised. You might remember in the beginning, it was the Moving Ohio Forward Fund. And then in 2012, it was the first round of the Hardest Hit Fund. In 2016, there was another round of Hardest Hit Fund money. And then through your hard work and through your advocacy, we've expanded our reach in Columbus. And we now had two allocations in the budget, the allocation June 30th of 2021, and more recently, the allocation in June of 2023. Those allocations provided money for Brownfield and for demolition. And as you all know, we got money in the last General Assembly for housing. A little more complicated than we would have liked. And I know Sean and the network has worked very hard on trying to smooth over some of those issues. But the point is, because of your work, you're all players, and your work has resulted in over 70,000 vacant and abandoned homes being demolished in Ohio since we started the movement back in 2009. And I'm incredibly proud of that. You know, we can go on, I can do a whole other talk about what the impact has been about taking down vacant and abandoned properties on surrounding properties, on property values, on stabilization. But I've argued for some time that we had to pivot. I don't think we should be known, or you should be known, just as organizations that knock down vacant and abandoned homes and commercial structures. The reality is many of you are doing a whole lot more than that. And I'm proud of the work you've done. But I know one of the examples we're going to talk about today, and Rob Horton, my friend, it's good to see you, and Commissioner Davis. There have been a lot of people I've enjoyed working with in the state, but none more than the director of the Southern Ohio Port Authority, Rob Horton, who you're going to see later, and Commissioner Brian Davis. They took me to a site that I think might have been the most polluted site, or one of the most polluted sites in the state of Ohio, was the new Boston Coke plant, right on the Ohio River, right next to the Scioto County water filtration plant. Just a really filthy site. And I've kidded about the fact that when I went out there the first time, they walked me through the site. They didn't warn me. Not only was there so much oil on the site, I had to throw my shoes off, but I came back and my pants were covered with ticks. But that's okay, because that's not the situation today. They have done amazing work. They have had a stick-to-it attitude from day one. They've never lost patience. And they're an example of what it takes to get this done. And one lesson I've learned in this movement, I just told you, it's been 16 years since we started, 15 years since the first land bank was opened up. These efforts take time. And I'm an old guy. I don't have that much time, but you folks have time. Your land banks have time. And I think looking at what's being offered here today is an example of how you can use property, how you can put it to good use, and how you might be able to not only put it to good use, but create a revenue stream for your respective communities. So I want to thank Sean for the opportunity to do this. And by the way, folks, I don't know, Sean had a horrible accident. He destroyed his, I don't know, right or left ankle. So he's been working hard in spite of his pain and his slow recovery. So we wish you the best, Sean. And at this point, I think I said all I can say. You have the book on the screen there. It's interesting. I've never been called an author, but if any of you have not received this book and would like a copy, please email me at my email address, jimrokakis@gmail.com, and I will send you a copy of The Land Bank Revolution, which, by the way, published in 2020, and so many good things have happened since then. We need to do another chapter, another book, because of the work you all have done. So again, thanks for the opportunity, and I look forward to today's program.
Okay, I think I'm up. Mark Boniface, I'm with Verdantis. We are an engineer and environmental services firm and have been doing a lot of brownfield redevelopment and renewables work in Ohio and across the country. I'm going to talk here to kick this off. I'm going to talk about just evaluating a site for solar. Next slide, please. The rest of this segment will include a discussion on environmental activities and funding opportunities. But I just wanted everyone to know that you can do an initial site review to see if a particular portion or all of a particular site is usable for solar. And it's important to note that an evaluation on the site to determine if it's viable for solar can be done at any time. It can be done before, during, after any environmental activities. A lot of people are targeting environmental sites that may have no further action letters or have already been closed. But sometimes it's useful to look at a site, even during the environmental activities, or maybe you can integrate some of the remedial activities with the solar design to save a little bit of money on both. There's about 3 or 4 different things that you generally want to look at for solar, depending on the appetite for the developer or whoever is going to be permitting and owning and operating the facility. You usually have a minimum acreage that you're looking to target. Starting out, before you do any kind of sophisticated modeling, you can usually use 5 to 7 acres per megawatt as a rule of thumb to know if you've got enough property to build a solar project. You're also looking for open space. You don't want to have a fully wooded lot where you have to spend money to clear trees, unless for some reason that would be part of the remedy for the project. You're also looking at topography, maximum slopes of 12 to 15%. Usually that limit is dependent upon the racking manufacturer for the solar panels. The racking can accommodate, there are several racking manufacturers that can accommodate slopes of up to 12 to 15%. And of course, slopes that are facing south or southeast or southwest are the best slopes for solar. You're also looking for sites that don't have a lot of other constraints, like maybe there's monitoring wells or gas vent wells if it's a landfill that may not be able to be moved as part of the solar operation. You can avoid those areas with your solar because it can be laid out in a modular fashion. but it does reduce the amount of area that you can build for solar. We typically take a site plan and lay out these constraints, areas that don't exceed 12 to 15%, setbacks and other criteria that may go into developing a site for solar, and we establish what we call a buildable area. And then that area is the area that you would use to model your potential solar facility. The last thing to look at with respect to solar is where are you going to interconnect to deliver the power, and what capacity does that connection point have to absorb, accept the power. On the next slide, I'll talk about two different ways to connect a project. But if it's going to be, let's say, a grid-tied project, you want that interconnection location to be 2 miles or less away from the site. And the reason for that is because the cost of your transmission line will just, as you go further away, it may not make the solar project pencil out the way you'd like it. And then determining the capacity of the distribution or transmission lines at that location to see if there's enough capacity there to take the power. And that would be through conversations with the utility. Environmental constraints that you're looking at include wetlands and streams, wildlife habitat assessments, cultural resources. You're also going to look at floodplains and water wells, oil and gas wells. Those can all be things that can be avoided or set back from when you lay out the solar facility. And then with respect to brownfields, you also want to understand the institutional and engineering controls that would be put in place or that are in place to maintain the remedy. So for example, if there was say a 2-foot cap of clean soil that had to be maintained at a site to maintain the remedy, you may or may not be able to drive posts in the ground to support the solar facility. And in that case, you would use, there are alternative foundations for solar projects, like a ballasted foundation system where you wouldn't have to penetrate that cap. And then the last thing is to consider schedule. Like I said earlier, you're going to be going through a permitting, design, and construction process here. And you may want to overlay that with the remedy. And if it makes sense, you might be able to integrate the design of the remedy and the solar project, and you might be able to realize some savings on both. Next slide, please. I think that Cliff Wood is going to be talking a little bit more about this in his section of the program, but I thought I would just touch on, we have this conversation with a lot of clients. When they are interested in solar, where are you going to connect that solar project and who's going to buy the power? Ideally, if you have a behind the meter project, what that means is the solar project is going to be tied into a facility that has a load, and it's going to be behind the utility's meter. So the power that's generated by the solar facility is going to be used within that facility. Now, at times, there may be more power generated than what's being used, and in that case, it's a net metering setup. So the power would actually flow back onto the grid or to the utility. And then in cases like at night when the sun's not shining, then the power will be coming into the facility from the utility. And there are net metering rules in Ohio for that. The off-taker of the power typically signs a power purchase agreement and can be on site or on an adjacent property. And then the size of the facility, the solar facility, would be limited to 120% of the annual load for the facility that would be connected to. Ideally, if you can have a behind the meter project, that is the best way to go right now, because that's going to be a shorter permitting time with respect to the interconnection, typically 4 to 6 months. I think that somebody will be talking about Senate Bill 275 later. The nice thing about that is that if Senate Bill 275 is passed at some point in the future, it will allow you to do a virtual power purchase agreement, and the off taker wouldn't necessarily have to be on site or on an adjacent property. And that's a huge plus for renewable energy projects. Lastly, if your site doesn't have somebody who's using power or doesn't have a load that you can tie into behind the meter, you're probably going to be looking at a grid tied project. Unfortunately, that's really going to extend the time frame of the interconnection permit, probably 3 to 4 years minimum. The regional transmission organization in Ohio is PJM, and they have been going through a queue reform process. They have a 3-step process that will take quite a bit of time to get through. They go through a feasibility study, an impact study, and then a facility study. And at each point along the way, you've got to pay some pretty hefty fees. And after the impact study, you will know then whether you have extra cost to upgrade the system on where you're planning to interconnect. Again, the off-taker is typically sign up PPA, but in this case, they do not have to be on site or located on an adjacent property. And then the size of the solar facility is only limited to the capacity of the distribution or transmission line capacity. On the next segment, Steve will cover the general environmental activities, and Shelby will cover the funding opportunities. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Yeah, I'm Steve Gross with Verdantis. I'm a senior consultant here and a certified professional. And my focus really has been for many years on the site assessment and remediation and working on a lot of different brownfield sites. I am working with Robert and Brian on the New Boston Coke site. In fact, this photo here is one of the old ovens and the stack that was recently taken down and demolished. But I'm just going to provide some general overview on kind of the process of the environmental assessment requirements. And I'll start off with, the phase 1 and working with the land bank. I'm sure most of you are familiar with the phase 1s as you take and acquire properties. But under that, it's really a public records kind of site investigation on available data, historic documents, interviews with individuals that either own or know or have worked at the property to get an idea really of the environmental site conditions of that property, to determine if there's been potential or known releases of hazardous substance or petroleum, and it kind of gives you an idea of a baseline liability. The results then from the phase 1 are used to formulate your scope of work from your phase 1 to form your scope of work for your phase 2. And that's more an intrusive investigation where you'll go out and maybe do soil borings, look at installation of groundwater monitoring wells, soil vapor, assess any type of surface water, if there's streams or retention ponds on the property, to determine where the potential contamination may be on the site, the extent of that, if there is any migration either onto or off the property, so that you can understand what your environmental constraints are on the property. That data then is compiled and evaluated through a property-specific risk assessment. After identifying the chemicals of concern on the property and the type of media that may be impacted, this risk assessment then looks at the toxicity exposure for specific receptors on the property, whether it's commercial, industrial, in some cases recreational, residential, and off-property receptors that may be immediately adjacent, or in some cases groundwater to surface water off property. So the risk assessment then evaluates those areas, looks at not just direct contact, but taking all the chemicals together and looking at that risk exposure for the receptors that are identified. Once we have the risk assessment done, all that information then can be used to develop your remedial action plan. And you can flip to the next slide here. So I want to talk a little bit about that and a little bit about the options. Really, these are laid out mostly for ones that we've worked on with solar fields, or properties that have potential use for solar fields. So it's kind of specialized towards that. As Mark indicated, if you know your development, you can utilize your end use into some of the options that you look at for implementing remedial action. For example, you have several different types, and in general, rather you have active remediation, the use of engineering controls, the use of institutional controls. They're used together in different levels. So the active remediation could be examples of soil removal. If you have a contaminated area, it may be excavated and taken off and disposed of off-site. It could be relocated on site. In some cases, we've had contaminated soils that came out to be hazardous, where we've been able to stabilize those in place, rendering them as non-hazardous, and then relocating them on site at a deeper elevation, or cover those with soil cap, or they've been taken off site as non-hazardous soils at a much less rate for disposal. Groundwater remediation, a lot of times if we have groundwater remediation on site that's not a regional issue, we may be able to go in there and do some type of chemical oxidation, reduce that down, implement a monitoring program, as well as sediment or surface water, where you may have a stream that runs through your property, or you have a stream adjacent to the property that's getting runoff from impacted sediments or soils, where you go in and either stabilize those sediments and remediate the ground or the surface water. As you can see here, these pictures are of New Boston Coke as they look now. The top photo shows the installation of a minimum of 24 inches of clean soil that meets commercial industrial standards. Prior to that, we had a grading plan that created a positive drainage across the site. We had some materials removed off-site, other materials were spread out, and we're putting them at depth, and we're taking clean soils and placing them on top of soils that exceed a commercial industrial standard. With that, you may have an engineering control. This particular one won't have an engineering control, but if in some cases it's required to have that soil cap as an engineering control, or you may have hardscape or driveways that are used to protect a commercial industrial worker from direct contact to the soils underlying the asphalt layer or concrete apron. Another is if we have to put any type of mitigation, vapor mitigation system in place, we would require an engineering control to operate and provide maintenance for that engineering control. Typically in a site like this, if we had vapor intrusion issues, it would really not be to the receptor on site. It would be more for the adjacent landowner, where if you determined that you had a nearby resident or you had a commercial industrial facility, you would have to look at potential vapor migration off-site and either put in a recovery trench, which we've done in other sites, for either toxic vapors or explosive gas. And mixed with that then is institutional controls. And that may be a restriction on groundwater. In some cases, you'll have groundwater that's impacted, and if you do what they call an urban setting designation to determine that the area around the site is not being used for potable use, you would still need, even though you've determined the groundwater may not be using as drinking water, you still would need to restrict that groundwater on your property, that no wells would go in for potable use. You could, maybe extract water during construction phases. If you do trenches for utility trenches and you run into shallow groundwater, you could write that plan that you can, remove and manage that water appropriately, but you just couldn't use water for potable source. The other institutional control that's commonly used is a land use restriction. You've heard me use the term commercial industrial standards. Typically in Ohio, we follow the Voluntary Action Program rules and regulations that provide us a guide for that. I do want to just go over that mainly if you go for funding, that sometimes that is a requirement. I know with the recent funding from Ohio Department of Development, it's been a requirement to obtain a no further action letter from a certified professional with a follow-up to submit that to Ohio EPA for a covenant not to sue, which is a release of liability. But if that's a requirement of your project, these are just some of the main things that need to be considered and know that will have to be done, and they are a cost to the project, which typically are covered under the funding. And Shelby will address some of the funding issues and information here after this. But you do need a defined remedial activities report that kind of summarizes all of the remediation activities that were done on the site. You may have a risk mitigation plan, which you've heard me talk about putting in a soil cap, and you may have soils at depth that are impacted that exceed construction excavation worker standards. The use of a risk mitigation plan, or an RMP, you may hear it otherwise, provides a mechanism to protect that construction excavation worker during construction activities. It identifies the contaminants. It gives suggestions on how to mitigate that, like, wearing the right PPE or protective clothing, don't eat or drink during construction, those types of things, and then just chemical awareness. If you do have an engineering control, the document you would have to coincide with that is a operation and maintenance agreement. That is an agreement between the property owner and Ohio EPA that engineering control will be maintained and monitored. A lot of this is wrapped up then in the environmental covenant. And if you don't use an environmental covenant, you would use a deed restriction that goes on the property. But if you're in the VAT program, it's the environmental covenant, and that's the agreement between the volunteer and Ohio EPA that memorializes the institutional controls and the engineering controls that will be used on the property. All of those are components of the no further action letter that the certified professional writes. And it's a detailed, comprehensive summary of all the environmental assessment, the identification of receptors and how those pathways are mitigated, as well as memorializing these documents that we've discussed. That's then presented to Ohio EPA with a request from the volunteer that they would like a covenant not to sue. That's reviewed by Ohio EPA and then issued by the director. And that runs then with the property. So if it sells, 10 years later, 5 years later, it continues on with the property. And now I'll just turn it over to Shelby and talk about funding.
Thanks, Steve. Hi, everyone. My name is Shelby Powell. I am a project coordinator for Ohio EPA in both the Ohio Brownfields and Voluntary Action Program that Steve just went through. Today, I will focus on our Targeted Brownfield Assessment, or TBA program, housed at the EPA, which aims to promote the redevelopment of brownfield properties by providing free environmental services to communities around the state. On the next slide, we have some brownfields that you may see around your community. Some common brownfields that we see run through our TBA program are churches, former dry cleaners, abandoned gas stations, auto repair shops. But as you can see, the list goes on and on. Next. As I mentioned prior, our services are free, emphasis on free, to eligible communities all year round. You can apply at any time. It's a first come, first served basis, but it's not competitive. Some of our commonly used services include the completion of phase 1s and phase 2s, which Steve expanded on earlier. Also geophysical surveys that can detect underground tanks, asbestos lead-based paint surveys, all completed through the use of our state contracted consultants. Again, all you have to do is apply for our services by filling out a TBA application that can be found on our website. However, you can reach out to me if you need assistance. And I think Sean just put a link to our website on the page. in the chat. As I also previously stated, you must be eligible for these services. Eligible applicants include, but are not limited to, land banks, city officials, nonprofits, or port authorities. I will note that single-family homes are not eligible. However, anything over 4 units in size, such as an apartment, is. Through our TBA program, we typically deal with commercial or industrial properties. However, if you have a property that you're unsure of its eligibility, please contact us and we would be happy to discuss those details. I want to point out that in comparison to some cleanup programs and grants, as an applicant for TBA funds, you would not need to own the property. All you would need is a signed access agreement from the property owner, which we include in our online application. Again, you do not need to own the property to apply for TBA funds, but you must be able to get access before we start any work. As you are all very aware, projects must be planned. Here are some general timeframes that you need to account for when applying for TBA funds. I want to note that these timeframes are based on the approval date of a project, not based on when you submit a TBA application. So as Steve dove into, once we determine if a project is eligible, we generally recommend a phase 1 be completed as a starting point. But to reiterate, a phase 1 examines the historical uses or due diligence of a property to highlight any areas of potential contamination that may need to be further investigated. A phase 1 must be conducted or updated within 180 days prior to the date of acquisition of a property, and they generally run from approximately $2,000 to $6,000. Next. Once a phase 1 is complete, a scope of work is developed for a phase 2 that can be used to determine if remediation or land use controls may be necessary. Through the TBA program, we generally tailor the scope of a phase 2 to the needs of the applicant so that they can leverage other potential funding that may be available for any cleanup or demolition that might be necessary. Again, you will not need to coordinate or pay for the phase 1 or phase 2 if that is necessary. Once your TBA application has been submitted and approved, Ohio EPA handles the rest. At the Ohio EPA, we also offer free technical assistance, which the new Boston Code utilized to help local governments and private individuals who have partnered with government entities navigate both the brownfield or VAP processes that Steve went through earlier. We can facilitate collaboration meetings to discuss project details and also help sort out funding options. If you plan to take a property through our voluntary action program, we can provide free technical review of documents, such as everything that Steve listed, including the remedial action plan, risk mitigation, operations and maintenance, or the NFA letter, or all of it together, to help navigate complex projects through the rules and ensure cleanups are protective of human health and the environment. Oh, I also want to note that the Ohio EPA is partnering with KSU's Technical Assistance to Brownfields, or TAB, in a couple of weeks to dive into the grant writing process. If you have already had a project or considering a project in your area, you will learn that what expertise and capacity is needed to both write and manage state and federal brownfield grants that provide funding for environmental assessment and cleanup.
I do want to jump in here real quick. I do just want to note, because I know this is probably a question a lot of people have right now, is about the announcements on the brownfield and demo programs through the Ohio Department of Development. We have been keeping in contact with them. They do not have a date set yet to award that funding. but they are working through the cure process diligently right now, and we'll continue to do so. And as soon as we find anything out, we will let everyone know. But I just wanted to keep everyone in the loop and let everyone know what's going on. Thanks.
Thanks, Sean. I appreciate that. And with that, that kind of leads me to connect the two. Again, if you we're looking to apply for a grant outside of Ohio EPA in terms of like US EPA grants that are a little bit more in depth. There are also other funding sources outside of the Ohio EPA, including the Ohio Department of Development's 2 grants that we kind of focus on that we help applicants leverage funds for. The first being the Building Demolition and Site Revitalization Program, which is not for brownfields properties, and it doesn't really specifically fund remediation, but can under certain circumstances. They also house the Brownfield Remediation Program, which is very popular and is the next step for many communities looking to resolve their findings of their phase 2 investigations, as this program can fund further assessment, remediation, or other means. Next. As a recap, the TVA program offers free services to help leverage funds if you have an eligible property. We are always willing to help you navigate through the environmental regulations and funding options for your brownfield project. If you have any questions, please do not hesitate to reach out to myself or any of our staff in the Ohio Brownfields program. Our contact information is listed pretty much everywhere, including our website in the slide. Thanks, Sean.
Thank you, Shelby. We were just going to take a quick second if there was any thoughts or questions that anyone may have as we kind of move out of the cleanup process and the available funding sources, and we're going to move into the case study in Scioto County at the old Boston Coke plant that is one of the few land bank properties that is going to see solar in Ohio right now. So if there's any questions, you can throw them in the chat, or you're able to unmute yourself. If there are no questions, we can keep moving along to Scioto County's project.
Okay, are we ready?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, go for it, Brian.
All right. Thanks everyone for coming on today. This project, I'm very excited, not only for what we've been able to accomplish with a whole lot of great partners to get to this point, but also excited on what can be done throughout the state in regards to basically duplicating what we've done, and in some cases magnifying it exponentially. So while here in Scioto County, we had a New Boston, in New Boston, we had a metallurgical coke facility. It was part of a greater steel mill complex that operated in this area for many, many years. And of course, it went out. The coke plant followed suit in 2002. And from 2002 to really the last year, it sat idle, and of course the legacy waste that was left, it had been stripped of its metal. Recycling company come in, taking most of the metal out, but left quite a mess. Quite a mess left there, and we had all this contamination. And within that contamination, we had wonderful products like benzene and arsenic, and well, Steve knows very much in detail what all at site, and it was bad. But through working with multiple entities such as Verdant and of course High Department of Development and just a slew of individuals, we've now got ourselves to where we now have a cap in place. We're finishing up the project. We have on on schedule that'll be following up once we're able to get the land released. And where the land is involved, of course, is we are taking care of mitigating the site. I came up with a phrase, and I don't know if Jim Rakakis is still on here. I hope he is, but I'm calling this
I'm here,
mitigation to
Brian.
megawatts.
I'm here, Brian. I'm here.
Okay, mitigation to megawatts, Jim. It just hit me. And that's what we're doing here, is literally taking a brownfield, and we're going to turn this into a power production. It's taken a lot to get here. It really has already been mentioned. It takes time, and you have to go into this with that mindset that you're not going to flip this on its head overnight. It is going to take a lot of time, a lot of steps that have to be done, and it's more of a it's definitely not a sprint. This is on. And if you go in that kind of a mindset, knowing that you have an end goal, and there's going to be a lot of detours as you go, it's not going to be a straight path. You're going to deal with a lot of bumps and things that are found. I will tell you, there were things that were found once we started scraping off the top layers, and our contractor went in and looking to see what we had. We found things along the way that we didn't know were there, and that's just part of it. And when you do this, you have to know that that could possibly happen, but because you got to finish, you got to stay with it. So we've been blessed that we've already found a developed a site, and we're very excited about what we're doing. As you can see in the picture here, this is the Ohio River. The red outlined area is this. It's full acres, of course, as you can see. The upper left right hand corner. I'm sorry, Portsmouth water filtration. There are intake lines literally run through this site into the Ohio River. And this has been an area of concern for multiple years. The good news is that Portsmouth is in the process of replant. They just bid. It's $120 million filtration plant will be built immediately behind the current plant. So as you see, it was very important for us to mitigate this site and get. So we have partnered with the city of Portsmouth. They've been wonderful to work with, and of course, Verdantis, which has been Steve and all of the work they put in. They prioritized this portion, although they've really ran everything in parallel, and all of this is going to come together at the same time. It's a timing issue, so we're very excited. And I'm going to stop talking. I'm going to turn it over to Robert Horton, who is the chairman of the Southern Ohio Port Authority. I'm the chairman of the Land Bank as a commissioner. I was blessed with the with getting put on the land bank, although I will tell you, we have done amazing thing with the land bank. And a matter of fact, what was mentioned earlier with Ohio Department of Development and all of the Brownfield grants, we're doing gas stations. We actually cut our teeth on gas station grants to clean up gas stations before we ever tackled this, to kind of just get our feet wet a little bit. And when I say that, that reminds me of Jim's shoes on the site a couple of years ago when he got his feet wet. But we did, and that kind of prepared us for the kind of administration that was going to be required to do this. And we've been blessed. I'm going to turn it over to Robert. And Robert, if you would opine on how the Port Authority, once we get this up, we'll be handing it over to them, and then they're going to rock and roll with it. Go ahead, Robert.
Thank you, Brian. Hi, everybody. I'm Robert Horton with the Southern Ohio Port Authority. As Brian has said, I mean, he's pretty much captured it from the beginning. You know, when I got involved with this project 5.5 years ago, my wife and I, we have a super Walmart that's right beside this site, and probably 95% of the population of Sauter County visits that Walmart about 3 or 4 times a week. And I'm one of them, and my wife is one of them. So I looked at that stack, I can't tell you how long, for several months, and I just wondered what's wrong here. And then of course I went to Brian, and I asked him about it and learned the history of that property. And just couldn't believe that it was still sitting there. No one had picked up the ball and ran. So I grabbed it, and I vowed to carry that flag. And we started moving forward on it, not knowing 100% what we have, doing all the research on it. And many years ago in this process, I was so fortunate to meet a gentleman here sitting here on this meeting, Mr. Jim Rackakis. And Jim, while I got you here, I just want to thank you for the belief in me and the encouragement for me to continue and just to keep moving forward on this. You know, back when we first looked at it, this program for funding didn't exist, and we were just picking it apart. We got that assessment grant, got that study done. That was a 2.5-year process, just getting it assessed. I mean, it was very dirty, very, very dirty, and a lot involved. And I mean, we found things on the property. It was a jungle, looked like, it came from the equator, not here. And we found pits and wells in there that we didn't even know existed. They had just grown over, and got those covered so somebody wouldn't fall in. I mean, been left open forever. But, to make a long story short, we grabbed it, moved forward with Jim's guidance and help, got everybody involved, got Versantis in, and just started hammering at it. And then the grants came available. We went after them vigorously. I mean, just went after it all. And in our remediation, we had 3 different scenarios. Of course, I wanted the best. I wanted to remove 10 foot of soil on 25 acres and replace it, but that was what, about $71 million, Steve? And, I mean, when you look at it and what you want to use it for, you have to consider that. Are you going to go after a heavy industry? I know we talk about heavy industrial, but sometimes with heavy industrial, they require heavy foundations that have to go through your cap if you just cap it, and with big foundations to carry big machines. And then when you are talking with a company and you've only capped it, taking from a cap to the best scenario, and you explain that to a company, they go, oh no, now we're going to get back into all of this other stuff again. Costs go up, and it's not as easy to market that property, and you may sit on it a while. And talking with Jim about these scenarios and possibly what you could do, I said, well, I could put another strip center on it. I'll use a monolithic slab, a floating slab. I wouldn't have to penetrate the cap totally, but still I've got, to adhere to my covenants and my engineering controls, irregardless. And coming from a company in my private sector, I work for the Dana B. Kenyon Company. Fortunately for me, we actually had a division with that company, Kenyon Energy, and they did solar. And talking with Jim, it hit a home run. But then I went to the commissioners and I asked them, I got thinking about, all right, well, how do we do this? Where does the money go? Who takes control of it? Who does this and who does that? Well, being with the Port Authority and what we do for encouraging business to come to Sauter County and try to create in the name of economic development, I asked them that if we saw this through, would it be possible that once we got it done, the Port Authority would be the recipient of the revenues? That way, the Port Authority will always have those revenues to apply back into the community for future other businesses, expansion of existing businesses, anything, a revenue source that we could use specifically for economic development. My fear was it goes into county funds, and you know how that all changes. Even my position changes over time. But we wanted to protect the money so that it would always be used for economic development for Scioto County. And they, of course, agreed. They were all about it. And then once we started the remediation process, that's how it all ended up being transferred. We owned one piece. The other piece was in a little protection area under an attorney's firm's, you know, when they left it, we got everybody to transfer into the land bank. Everybody out there on this meeting, the land bank is the best place to park this kind of property, you know, properties, brownfields or contaminated properties, for your best protection. As long as you are under the process or headed in the process of remediation, you're protected from being sued by anybody or the EPA or anybody else for that matter, if those positions change over the next 10 years. But it's the safest place to put it while you're in that process. Once we receive the covenant not to sue, then it'll go back to the Port Authority, and we will use the Port Authority's incentives to build the solar project, and then to take those revenues and get them back to our community for years to come. That's how it all came about. And again, God bless you, Jim. I can't thank you enough.
Rob, can I interrupt here, Sean, just for a second? I'll shut up then.
I'm done. I'm good.
Sean, this would never have happened without Rob Horton and Brian Davis. And I appreciate your kind words, Rob, but not many people would have stuck to it the way you did in Scioto County. This, as you know, you said 5.5 years in the making. You never lost sight of the goal line. You said picking the ball and run with it. Well, you picked up the ball and ran with it, but it was a long run. And it was, I would call a broken field run. It was not a direct shot. And you guys deserve all the credit in Scioto County. You, Commissioner Davis, and you, Rob, and I want to thank you for letting me work with you.
Thank you, Jim, so much. I appreciate that. I really do. But that's pretty much it in a nutshell. And no, it's not the easiest thing to do, but it's the right thing to do. And I implore anyone out there, especially if you can set it up and protect those revenues. Solar's perfect. Solar does it, you know, the imprint, as Steve was saying earlier, you know, you can do the above ground footings, the ballast type footings, so you don't bust that cap. And it was the least expensive. The more, I mean, the cost, everything just worked with that, so that we could see the maximum revenue to come back to use for our county, and then protect that. And hopefully you've got counties that are willing to park it in the land bank or in the Port Authority, earmarked for exactly that for years and years to come. And I think it's awesome. I'm excited to be a part of it. And there, like Jim was saying, it is a long time. There were many nights I went home and thought, what am I doing? But I can tell you it's worth every minute I've spent on it. I wouldn't do it any other way.
Thank you, Rob. I appreciate it.
Yes,
Thank
thank
you.
you.
Next up, we'll be hearing from Cliff Wood with Prairie Wind Group. But if I
Where are we?
can't hear you.
Did we lose him? Oh, no.
There you go.
Just again, thank you everyone who's on this webinar. On behalf of the team, I thank everyone. Point of housekeeping. Amy, how are we doing on time? How are we on time?
You've got till about 10 after if Tom is going to take 5. So we'll see if that's possible. That gives folks about 15 minutes, 10 to 15 minutes of questions.
Okay.
So we're good. We're good.
Okay. Yeah, again, my name is Cliff Wood. I am co-founder and president of Prairie Wind Group. We are a solar consulting and development company. You can see the image in front of you, some of the services we provide. Next slide, please. So I'm going to pick up the discussion from the point where your site, you have a brownfield site, it's been remediated. You've heard from Verdantis, you've heard from Ohio EPA about the processes that are required to get the site to where it's been remediated. So I'm going to talk about generating clean energy and income. So there are 2 ways to sell power from your solar field. I've got a slide or 2 on that. Also, we're going to talk about federal tax incentives that drive solar investment. They're also known as investment tax credit. The ITC really is the oil that drives the solar industry in Ohio, perhaps in every state. And we'll talk about the ITC and federal investment tax credits. Also, we've got a slide that talks about feasibility study and how solar energy is monetized. And finally, after I speak, my colleague Tom Bullock is going to talk about re-envisioning how solar is sold in Ohio. Specifically, he's going to talk about House Bill 197, which we dubbed the Community Solar Bill, and he's going to touch on a bill that we've been working on called Senate Bill 275, which is really virtual net metering. And as was mentioned earlier, virtual net metering is a game changer in Ohio if we can get to virtual net metering. Next slide, please. So in Ohio, there are laws that govern how solar can be used or developed. One of the rules is called net metering. It's in the Ohio Revised Code, Rule 4901. There are 2 ways to sell power from your solar field. One way is called in front of the meter. And these are shorthand terms that we developers use a lot. The second way to sell power from your solar field is behind the meter. In a in front of the meter project, the power is not used on site, but typically it's sold directly to the utility. And typically these solar fields are much larger than behind the meter projects. They can range from anywhere from 75 acres to, I think there's some fields I've heard of in Ohio that are almost 1,000 acres. So these are large utility scale, what's called a utility scale projects. Now, behind the meter is also known as net metering. In a behind the meter project, the power is sold on site. An example: you're an industrial company or homeowner, and you want to put solar on your roof or on the ground in your backyard. That is a typical behind the meter project. Again, the power is used on site. And typically, these are smaller projects. When you talk about land use, anywhere from 5 to 75 acres. Next slide, please. Before you let me talk about net metering. Thanks for not jumping, Sean. I appreciate it. So net metering, it is really the law that governs how we do solar in Ohio. Essentially, it says the law allows for a utility customer to generate their own renewable energy. But the main part of the law is it requires the utility to provide net metering. It requires utilities to allow you to do solar, put solar on your house, or put solar in your backyard, or on a commercial roof, let's say. Some of the key provisions of the net metering law: the meter must be located on your premises. That's critical. In many cases, what that means is if I have a solar field and I have a business next to the solar field, let's say, or on the side of the business, you literally have to run a wire or conductor, as we say, from that solar field to your electrical panel. The other interesting part of net metering, as was mentioned earlier, is you're allowed to produce at least 120% of your current usage. Typically, as developers, we don't like selling power back to the utilities in a net metering project because the utility may pay for the power you sell to them at 4.5 to 5 cents a kilowatt hour. And so typically we try to size these projects so that we're not exporting power back to the utility company. Now, as you would probably imagine, if you sell power to the utility company, they're not going to write you a check for that excess power. It's issued, the power you sold is issued as a credit, and it offsets future charges on your electric bills. Next slide, please. I mentioned earlier that the investment tax credit is the oil that drives, it really lubricates this solar industry. In 2022, President Biden signed the Inflation Reduction Act, and it created probably one of the largest, most consequential set of solar incentives ever in the U.S. I've been in this business since 2010, and this by far is the best investment tax credit regime we've seen. The purpose of the Inflation Reduction Act is really it's intended to boost U.S. solar installation, and actually behind that as well, it's intended to help drive production of solar panels in the U.S. That's the secondary purpose of the Inflation Reduction Act. There are bonus incentives, and these incentives are intended to target specific communities, such as energy communities. That is, communities where coal mines, let's say, have closed. Low-income communities are also targeted in the IRA. The beauty of the tax credit is that it's a dollar for dollar tax credit. And if you are an investor and you own the solar asset, the solar facility, and let's say the facility costs $10 million to build, and let's say the ITC is at 30%, the investor receives, when they file their taxes in year one, would receive a credit for $3 million. So you could see how that type of, I'll use the term lubrication, could drive financial models. Let me just touch on quickly some of the incentives and how this regime is structured. There's a base, if you have a solar project that's less than 1 megawatt AC, and 1 megawatt is about enough energy to power about 83 homes. If you have a project that's less than 1 megawatt AC, there are no requirements. If you have a project that's greater than 1 megawatt AC and you want to achieve 30% in ITC, you have to pay the laborers on the project prevailing wage, or you have to have an apprenticeship program. I'm not going to read through all the other incentive descriptions. You can see them on the screen. Next slide, please. So this is kind of where the rubber hits the road. So a feasibility study, once we have a client who has expressed an interest or in investing in solar, then we do what's called a feasibility study. The first thing we do is we walk the site and do a site assessment. Fortunately for me, I didn't get any ticks on my shoes when I did the first assessment. But I understand what Jim's saying. It was a pretty wild area for a while. After the site assessment, we do what's called a system design. We design what's called Helioscope. It's a software or an application that allows us to design photovoltaic systems, But the key output of the system design is the amount of energy. It will tell you how many solar panels you could put on the site, and will tell you that our application Helioscope will tell you how much energy the site can produce. Some of the key inputs when we do our financial modeling, when we do our cash flow analysis, some of the key inputs are the term, how long is the project, how long is, if we're doing a power purchase agreement, how long is the PPA, what's the cost of the system, and we look at how another key input is the AC production monetized, and what are the applicable tax incentives. I covered those a moment ago. The key output from this financial model for us is the internal rate of return. And what we're trying to do here is we're trying to satisfy two customers. We're trying to satisfy our client, which may be an investor. We're also trying to satisfy our other client, in this case, Scioto County. And so we want to make sure that in our financial model, there is sufficient internal rate of return to entice an investor. Usually, we target 10 to 12%. Most investors we've talked with, they're comfortable with that range of internal rate of return. But we're also we want to make sure that Scioto County, in this case, there is enough money in the system that we've modeled it in a way that it puts enough money in their pocket so they're interested in the project. I'm going to touch on this, and then for the sake of time, I'm going to just stop. Income streams for the site owner. Now, the site owner, as you heard Robert talk about, it could be the county, it could be the port, depending on how your county or how your city or whatever is organized. But the key income streams for this project, the Scioto County project, is an annual lease payment. Right now, market rate for property is $1,000 to $2,500 an acre. And so in our model, we've targeted something a little more than that, actually. And that money is paid to the Port Authority. Again, it's $1,000 to $2,500 an acre. So let's say we're doing 10 acres. That's lease payments can be anywhere from $1,000 to $25,000, $10,000 to $25,000 a year. The other revenue stream for a project like this is what's called payment in lieu of taxes. In Ohio, typically on a project, any type of large project, you have to pay tangible personal property tax. Under Ohio law, we can forego that and pay what's called pilot, payment in lieu of taxes. And typically under Ohio law, that it ranges from anywhere from $7,000 to $9,000 a megawatt. And so, as you can see, if you had a site that's 10 megawatts, then the pilot payment could be anywhere from $70,000 to $90,000 a year. Significant income. The final bullet is revenue sharing. In some projects, we can share. Again, as a developer, you're trying to balance two things. You want the investor to invest in a project, but you want your other client, which in this case, Scioto County, you want them to be interested. You want to put enough money on the table so they say, this is a project we're very interested in and we'd like to do a deal. And in terms of revenue sharing, that means when we look at the power, if we sell power, let's say from the solar farm at 8 cents a kilowatt hour or 10 cents a kilowatt hour, in our model, we share some of that with Scioto County. And I won't go into the details, but essentially those are the revenue streams that help these models work.
Cliff, we did have a question in the chat. Is the Boston Coke project going to be behind the meter or grid tied?
That's a good question. So it's possible it could be both, actually. If you recall from Commissioner Davis's discussion, contiguous to this site, to the old Boston Coke factory site, we have Walmart, and we're talking with Walmart to buy some of the power. We have a company called Inframetal. It's a large industrial concern, that a steel fabricator. We're talking with them about buying power. And then we also have the wastewater treatment plant or the filtration plant, and we're talking with them about buying power. But there's also the capability. We also, if we need to, we could sell power in front of the meter. Not sure why we would do it, but we could. If we had excess power, we could sell it in front of the meter. Yeah. So it could go both ways, but our preference right now is behind the meter. That's the model that works best for everyone.
Right. We'll open it up if there's any other questions for Cliff. Not, we will move to Tom Bullock with the Citizens Utility Board of Ohio.
Good afternoon, everybody. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, sir.
All right, so I'll go fast. Tom Bullock, Executive Director, Citizens Utility Board of Ohio. We're a statewide consumer advocate for your monthly utility bills, natural gas and electric. And Cliff Wood is on our board, does a great job. A number of other people on the call are also working closely with us. Could we do the next slide? This describes why we're involved as a consumer advocate. We're working with those who want to do innovation in Ohio's energy system. There's an argument to be made that we have more change in the energy industry, energy sector than we've experienced in 100 years. That's a good thing. And that could unlock value for consumers if we plan ahead and use foresight and exercise some leadership in Ohio and the Midwest. States have a lot of say over energy policy. The feds have some influence as well. And Cliff just talked through the investment tax credit, which are having a big impact. But what this shows, these are 2023 baseball statistics about energy pricing. What zoomed in here is a portion of the larger chart on the left. But what is the cheapest energy today? So the top three cheapest energies, or the least expensive, are onshore wind, solar, large-scale solar, and natural gas. There's a cost range here. These are national statistics. If we had Ohio specific or Midwest specific, we might have a little bit of a different inflection. But the big picture is that over the last 10 or 12 or 15 years, solar has been coming down in price. So has wind been coming down in price. Natural gas is competitive. Those are the three, I think, big ones. Some of the more traditional energy sources are higher cost for various reasons. And so as consumers, we want to see low cost, affordable, clean, and other benefits. There's other benefits like we should all be getting smart thermostats so we have control over our monthly bills and we have transparency of information. We're at the tip of or the verge of a revolution, I think. But solar is also reliable in price. You get typically long-term, predictably priced power contracts. And so companies, institutions, and even residents, residential consumers can plan ahead, and that's a good thing. Other fuel sources will sometimes ride the roller coaster of inflation. We saw this after Putin invaded Ukraine. We saw shocks to the national, the global commodities price for natural gas, and that had after effects we felt in our energy, in our electricity bills. If you could go to the next slide. Thank you. Want to talk about two pieces of legislation pending in the Ohio legislature. And as a caveat first, I think Cliff and I had these, what we'd like you to do is, if you want, get involved with some of these public education, policy education opportunities with not only the legislature, but the Public Utilities Commission, county commissioners, and more. I've got a government affairs background. I used to work on Capitol Hill way back when, and I know Jim Rakakis from having moved in 2004 to Northeast Ohio, where I live. So we'd be happy to work with all of you on that. And I think what we need is this spirit of innovation and change. So two big bills. This is the first. The second is in the next slide. That could change the way that we use brownfields and land bank owned properties. And the first is community solar. That's House Bill 197. What it would do, you see on the slide here, would allow essentially the bundling of residential consumers. Residential is 1 and 2 family homes and the like. Right now, you typically would only serve a residential consumer by putting solar on your roof. I've done that. That's expensive. It pays itself off, but it's a long payback period of 10 to 12 years. Maybe these days you could get it down to 8 to 10, depending on your circumstances. What this, though, would do is allow an offsite consumer, a consumer to take power off-site, or perhaps you're a resident in a multifamily. You don't have the roof space, or maybe you're going to move soon, or maybe you have nice oak trees that you don't want to take down, nor should you. And so there's a bunch of circumstances why you wouldn't put solar on your property. And you could get a nicer price by essentially bundling your demand with others. That's what community solar would do. The proposal here would be 1 gigawatt. It's a pilot program on green fields or farmland, 500 megawatts on a distressed property. And that includes 7 different categories. But one of the most important ones, or the 2 most important ones for our call today, is brownfields are included, as is land owned by a county land reutilization corporation, as defined in section 172401 of the Ohio Revised Code. This is still pending in the legislature. There's a discussion about, how would you handicap its odds of success? It's we're going to keep after it, but it's kind of simmering, and we were hoping for more forward momentum before the summer than we got. If you could go to the next slide, and then this is the last one, I think. The Senate Bill 275, as Amy said in the comments, this is something that a number of us on the call have been putting a lot of time into. This would be targeted for commercial virtual net metering. That means commercial customers. Now, the bill doesn't say it, but the business model and the financials of development say this approach really makes sense for institutional customers. So I'm told it's the mush market: municipalities, universities, schools, hospitals. There are probably some others, like you could find a manufacturing family-owned company that is in the automotive supply chain. But take, for example, a school district. You might have 1 large high school, 1 or 2 middle schools, 4 to 8 elementary schools, and a bunch of outbuildings on their sports facilities. Under this proposal, you could aggregate all of the demand from all of those buildings, because it's one customer. You're allowed to have multiple meters as long as one customer. Same for a hospital, for example. And you would need, most likely, more than 10, 20 acres. You'd probably need 40 to 80 acres to supply all of that power. This proposal would allow you to do that up the road, in the next county over, wherever it made sense, right? Wherever it made economic sense according to free market competition in Ohio's deregulated generation market. And that's where solar developers like Cliff and Prairie Wind and others on the call today have been doing their good work. So virtual net metering, Cliff really covered this in his presentation, would mean instead of having to be on premise or immediately next door, which you're currently allowed to do, it would allow you to go down the road, across the road, down the road, or the next county over, as long as you're in the same utility service territory as your customer. So the different categories allowed under the bill as currently drafted would be a brownfield, a property affected by mining subsidence, so coal and other things, a landfill, property owned by a county land reutilization corporation, an industrial roof, and that's it for now. So that's the concept. It's been introduced by Senator Dolan in the Senate Energy and Public Utilities Committee. There was a hearing. We spoke on it. So did Cliff. And Kurt Princik, I think, is on the call as well. What am I missing? There's also in this proposal prohibition on putting solar on agricultural land. That is an important principle that a number of Ohio senators really wanted to get addressed. So what this would do is follow the lead of the Ohio Senate's policy preferences and see if we could get solar moving. There's no cap on this capacity. So this is not a pilot program. if it passes, it would allow us to just move forward and rock and roll and build a lot of capacity. That's it. That's Amy's given me the hook. Thank you for the opportunity to present.
Yeah. Okay. Well, wow. I think we hear the applause in the background. That was an amazing pile of information, just an incredible resource here. We will have all this recording and this slide deck will go up on the Ohio Land Bank Association's website, so you can listen to it all again, send it to your colleagues. We are pretty tight with time right now, but I think what I'd like to do is remind you that what we've done, go back to the cohort if you can, I want to make sure, because this way people can actually get questions answered in the next meeting. We're putting this cohort together so that those of you who are pretty interested still have a lot of questions for various experts. What we're going to do is put a meeting together for those of you who really want to keep going down the path, but you're not sure, but you have questions, you want to have some specific answers. Take note of this, my email address, let me know if you're interested, and then I will begin sending out sort of follow-on meetings. We'll probably have them monthly, and the folks that have been on the call, many of them will be helping along the way as well. So if you didn't get a big answer today, we'll help with that in a little bit. But we do have probably 2 or 3 minutes for questions if you would like to, if there's a burning one. Anybody? Wow.
Amy, I'll just add
Sure.
a brownfield expert, Kurt Princik from CEP Renewables, formerly worked at Ohio EPA, said, look, we've been doing brownfield rehabilitation for decades. We've made a lot of progress, but there still are thousands of properties that have yet to be developed. Why? Because there hasn't been a business case. Solar is a great business case for a whole nother layer of those properties on, in our state. And wouldn't it be fantastic if we could develop those, put those back in a productive economic activity, help our local communities, add energy, so all of the people on this call really have an opportunity to help get that going.
Wonderful.
Awesome. Anybody else? Sean, I want to thank everyone for participating. Sean, you want to close?
Yep, I just want to also thank everyone for joining us today. Like I said, this will be recorded, and I will send out the slide deck. The recording will be up on our website in about a week. It'll also go out in our newsletter, so everyone will have access to that. And if there's any questions, if after the fact, if you think about a question or there's any follow-up that you would want, you can email me and I can get you in contact with the speakers. So feel free to reach out anytime. And with that, I appreciate everyone joining us today.